Alright, so this bike came to me. It's got some carb issues, or the motor stalled out, so I'm going to have to work through that. But he also wants the front wheel bearings replaced, as it's making some noises as he's riding. So I think this video I'm going to show you how I disassemble the front wheel and get the bearings out and put some new bearings in. Alright, so some tools we're going to need to get these wheel bearings out. 19mm to pull the axle nut off. I use a screwdriver just in case this likes to turn. Put it in the hole. You can hold it while you're backing off that nut. 14mm wrench. You're going to need that for the brake nut to remove that. Inside the hub, behind the seal, snap ring. So you need your snap ring pliers. I have a hammer and various punches that are going to help me remove my bearings from the actual wheel hub. You're going to use some grease. You put the axle back in, lubricate that, and then the bearings. And the bearing size for the Z50 is a 6201 2RS, which is a sealed bearing. You need 2 of those for the front wheel and 2 of those for the back wheel. Alright, so we'll start disassembly. Also, I'm going to use a block so I can use that as a surface to knock these bearings out. And then for me, I'm working in the house today. It's a little chilly here, believe it or not, in Florida in December. I'm going to use this as a stand that I'm going to put underneath the bike to raise the front wheel off the ground. We'll put that underneath the foot pegs. So let's get busy. Alright, we'll start by putting this underneath the engine. These axle nuts off. 19mm screwdriver in through the hole on the axle, vintage axle. Before I pull that, get my brake nut off. It's 14mm. Going the wrong way. Alright, so that's off. Get your barrel nut out from your arm so you don't lose that. Get your spring. And just set those to the side. Now we're good. We're gonna pull the axle and the wheels loose now. Roll that out. Now we have access to the wheel bearings. So we got 2 bearings in here. You can just pull the brake hub off. It's a good time to look at the brakes, see if they need to be, the shoes need to be replaced or not. We got 1 bearing in here, and I can tell that it's very rough and worn down, so definitely the culprit for noise. And then on the other side, we have a seal. I prefer to use a flathead screwdriver, but we'll use the Phillips for today. So you want to pry this seal out. Just be gentle. I'm going to reuse this one. And then what we have inside of here is a snap ring. So you want to make sure you get the snap ring out before you start trying to remove your bearings. That went flying. Snap rings out. Now we got access to both sides to work on getting these bearings out, and that's where we're going to use the punch. So before I get any further, I just got 2 bearings, and I'm going to put them in the freezer to help the metal shrink a little bit. So we'll just go ahead and put these in here for the meantime, and then we'll get back at it. Alright, so I'm going to use the tools I have right now, but I did just go and order myself a blind hole bearing removal kit. Give it a shot, since I always use punches, and this may be an easier tool, of course. So that's on order, but we're going to continue on with the method that I use. I'm going to give a couple different things a shot here. So this is an old 3/8 inch extension here. Fits pretty snugly inside of the 12mm bearing hole. Just going to give it a little tap. Seat it in there, and then I'm gonna try and see if I can't use my punch on the other side and give it a tap. So that method is probably not gonna work for me this time. Doesn't look like the bearings moved. There's a inner sleeve inside of these that make it a little difficult. I try to push it over. If you can put a punch in there and push it over so you can catch a lip. That's what you really need to do, is catch a lip on these. So we'll just kind of push that inner sleeve over to the side and hopefully gain some access to the bearing. And then this punch that I'm using is a gear wrench from a gear wrench kit, and it's part number's 82280, a 3/16 inch punch. So it feels like I got a little lip to pot. I'm gonna So I got the lip of it and was able to knock out the bearing. So the bearing's out. The old bearing. And then this is the inner spacer that I'm talking about. That makes it a little difficult unless you push it over to get some clearance to get that inner bearing surface to punch it out. So the hard part's done. It's getting that first bearing out. And then we got access to the other bearing, so we'll just use our punch. Give it some taps. I'm going to use my bigger punch here. This is the bigger punch. This is part number 82281. It's a 1/4 inch punch by gear wrench. Alright, that one did the job. So we're got our surfaces to examine, make sure there's no score marks from the previous bearings we just pushed out. Might be a good, I'd probably say get in there and clean those out with a little bit of solvent so there's not any residual oil or grime or dirt in there, creating tighter than necessary tolerances. And again, I have my bearings in the freezer. I'm going to let those sit in there for 20 to 30 minutes. And the reason that is when metal gets cold, it shrinks. So we're shrinking the bearing, and we should be able to get this tapped in as soon as we let it sit for about 20 or 30 minutes in the freezer. So hang tight. Don't let my wife know, but I'm going to spray a little brake cleaner on this towel in the house. Clean out these races here. Alright, so we're now ready for the bearings to be pushed in. They've been in the freezer for about 20 minutes. I did gather up a few more tools and supplies for this job. I'm going to use a little WD-40 to lubricate inside of there on the hub and then on the outside of the bearing. This is a 1/2 inch socket set that I'm using, but this socket 7/8 of an inch in size, and then I have the extension that fits nicely on the outer edges of the bearing, so I can press it in with a light tapping. So I'm gonna go ahead and grab my bearing that should be nice and frosty out of the freezer. So before I go ahead and get that in, you want to start on this side of the hub, because this is the only side that this is going to go back in, and you can't forget this spacer. It's an important part. So this side is going to be on the left side of your bike. These hash marks, or these cutouts here, are actually for speedometers that the Japanese ones, Z50s, come with. But that's what it looks like. So start on this side, the side without the drum. We're gonna go ahead and put our bearing in first. As you can see, we can't fit it in from this side, so we're gonna go ahead and put our bearing in, and then we'll flip it around and drop this in before we put the second bearing in. So I'm gonna go ahead and lubricate with WD-40 the inner race, put some on my bearing. Go ahead and get it sat in there, nice and flush. I'm going to go ahead and use my socket that fits nicely around the outer edge of the bearing. We're going to give it some firm taps to seat it down. Okay, so that's all the way down now. And remember, we had the snap ring. So we're going to go ahead and put our snap ring back in. Alright. And then we also can put our seal back in. I'm going to put a little lubricant on it so it will go in. Now these are sealed bearings on both sides, so don't worry about any oil or grease to be put in here to pack it. We're just going to do this for aesthetics. Let's give it a little tap. Alright. Flip the wheel around. Now this is a step that you don't want to forget. Put your collar back in. Drops in there nice and tidy. Again, put some lubricant inside of there. Go grab my other bearing. Okay, go ahead. Guess I could put a little lubricant on this. Make sure it gets on the bearing. I'm just going to give it a few taps to get it in there flush. Then use my socket. Give it some firm taps. Alright, nice and flush. So we're good to go there. We got our two bearings in place. Go ahead and put our hub back on. Next step for me will be, let's put some axle grease back on this axle. So that way it's easy to take out next time we need to service the tires or tubes, or hopefully not the bearings. Or the brakes. We'll set that right there. Alright, we'll get another vantage point for us as I put this back on. Alright, so just look at the front wheel parts diagram, just looking at, we want to make sure we put the axle in the right way. So it's going to come in from the non-brake hub side, or the non-drum side. It's the head of the axle, and then the nut is on the brake cover side. You need to get that spacer on there. So it's always good just to kind of go reference the exploded parts diagram just to make sure you guys are putting your stuff back together appropriately. Alright, so let's get the wheel back on. We'll go ahead and put our spacer back in. And then we're going to come in from this side. Line this part of the hub back up into this stud on the fork. Okay, so we got our axle through. Go ahead and put my safety nut back on. 19mm. And then I'm going to put my screwdriver back through that hole. Alright. Next up, we're going to come over here and just put our brake parts back in. Barrel nut back in there. Spring. $14mm. We'll tighten that up. I'll do some final adjustments on it once I have to do some work on the engine. Once I get it ready to ride, I'll make some final adjustments for the handbrake and make sure feeling is good on the brake pull. So that's about it.